Hello everybody and welcome back. As always, I am Mateo311 and this is your channel for everything VR related. So today we are discussing the number one issue that has been plaguing VR games since day one. This issue has held back every single title. It doesn't matter if it's on PC, Quest, or PSVR2. This is the number one issue that developers face. So I'm going to tell you exactly what it is, why it keeps happening, and just discuss how it's definitely not doom and gloom. There is a light at the end of the tunnel and we are heading towards it. Now, for everyone deep in the VR industry, a lot of this should be common knowledge. For everyone else though, I feel like it's going to be a true eye-opener of what exactly is going on. Now, there are of course links and timestamps if you want to skip ahead, but before we jump in, this video is brought to you by Ridge Wallet. I've been using one of these guys for over a year now and I absolutely love it. I used to have that bulky old school wallet that you could barely fit in your pants, but not this. Super sleek, takes all your credit cards, got a slot for money, fits right in your pocket. And it even has a tracker if you're one of those people who keeps losing track of these things. Ridge has also recently added a massive array of new styles, plus additional accessories like rings and keychain holders. Here's a link in the description if you want to check these out. And don't forget to use discount code Mateo311 for 10% off. Okay, so let's jump right into this and just start by breaking down that major issue that plagues all VR games into the what and why. The what is, it's undeniable that all VR games are a lot more shallow than their flat screen counterparts. And the why? Well, that's just budgetary constraints. There's not enough money to make bigger games. So right there, that's the issue that has been plaguing VR forever. There's not enough money to make bigger and better games. So where do we go from here? Now, I definitely need to break this down a lot more because simply saying budgetary constraints doesn't give you a clear picture of what's actually going on. For a deeper understanding, we need to take a look at the current status of flat screen games. There's been roughly 50 years of progress for both PC and console games, and it only recently exploded into a multi-billion-dollar industry. Back in the 90s, an award-winning top-selling game could have a staff as small as 10 people. Today, though, AAA blockbuster VR games could have budgets larger than the majority of movies. Gamers have also come to expect extremely lengthy campaigns, cinematics that rival what you get in the movie theaters, and full-on motion capture with professional voice actors. On the other side of this, studios are now expecting to make hundreds of millions of dollars in return. So it doesn't matter if you're on the consumer or business end of VR, if you start comparing your games to flat screen titles, you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. Now, to move into what exactly is happening with VR games, we first need to take a moment and describe the components that make up a great game. Now, many gaming aspects can be subjective. However, I think there's three quantifiable aspects that we can all agree on. First is quality, which can branch off into many aspects. That's the amount of polish, lack of bugs, the overall graphics. That's what I put into the quality package. Next up, we have the storyline, which is cinematics. Is there a deep lore? Is there stuff to read or little things around the world that you can find that'll give you just more of a deeper storyline? Or is there a storyline at all? And then finally, we have the overall mechanics. This is where you spend the most of the game. This is your overall gameplay loop. Almost every single game is the same thing over and over and over again. But how do they make that exciting that you just want to keep doing the same thing time and time again? So those are three major aspects. And due to budgetary constraints, VR never nails all three, or it's rather extremely rare. Usually you nail one and you do pretty good on another and kind of completely skimp on the third. That third that usually gets skimped on is the storyline because it's just the least cost effective. To develop a story that's in the background or make cinematics, anytime you make a cinematic, it's a one-time shot. If you make an animation for an enemy, you're going to see the animation 1,000 times. But if you make a cutscene, you're going to see it just once, so it's not cost effective. So by now, you should start to understand why we're constantly seeing those same type of VR games over and over again, a lack of depth, roguelikes, etc. But I want to spend a moment just emphasizing on what it takes to nail all three of those major components of a great game. First off, it's money. I've been talking about that. Obviously, there's not enough money in VR right now. But on top of that, you need years of development. Those big AAA flat screen games are now taking 4 or 5 years to develop. And also, you need a studio that's confident to take this on. Like, no one wants to take on a major gamble, especially with VR just still up in the air. The hardware is changing still very fast. 4 years, you definitely move up in mobile tech. So anyone who starts developing a game, they're guaranteed to pretty much be developing on old hardware. And by the time the game releases, there's something newer out there. It's just overall a lot of flux, a lot of uncertainty, and of course, most importantly, not enough money. So how did AAA flat screen games do it? How did they get ahead? How did they get out of this, bubble that you're trapped in, that the industry needs to grow more before there's more money so you could develop bigger games? Well, VR's been struggling to get out of that for a long time, and the beginning was the same mentality that we've seen for consoles. Just make bigger games and people will flock to the hardware. Unfortunately, it didn't really work for VR. Valve tried this, Meta tried this. From Valve, of course, we got Half-Life Alyx. Big impact, not enough to truly grow the industry. There's a lot of factors that slow down the growth of the industry that I'm not going to get into for this video. However, Meta also tried. They funded Medal of Honor, Stormland, and then they started buying up studios, but basically they started to push out bigger and bigger content. And again, it just wasn't working for PCVR. They decided you got to go the other route. You got to grow the industry first, which they've been doing with the Quest. They were selling the Quest 1, Quest 2 at or near a loss. They definitely grew the industry. There's a huge player base now. Indie developers have been able to make 100 million or even more with their titles. So we're finally getting there. So this shows, like I said earlier, there is light at the end of the tunnel. There's a lot of hope for the future. The number of quests out there is almost equal to the number of PlayStation 5s. There's like 40-ish million. So we have a player base. The AAA titles should just stop flying out, right? No, because the studios that have the money to take the chance on big name titles, unfortunately, are not going to spend that money in VR. Those big studios also don't have VR experience, which is necessary. Every time a AAA studio kind of dabbled in VR, they didn't do very well. They kind of, dipped their toe in the water, got a feel for it, and like yanked it back out, mainly because they knew they wouldn't make money. But also, some of the old school methods of developing a game just don't work right in VR. It's a completely different approach with newer technical aspects to it. Again, digressing. However, the main point is they don't want to take the big gamble in VR because even if they are successful, the margins are smaller, like Ubisoft just saw with Assassin's Creed Nexus. The game sold very well for a Quest title. However, they just weren't happy with the amount of money they made. And this goes back to what I said about expectations in gaming lately. These AAA studios are expecting to make hundreds of millions of dollars in return. And I can understand that. You spent 4 or 5 years developing a game, millions upon millions spent, millions on voice actors, so many other aspects, years of QA. So I get it. There's a huge investment. You expect a huge return. Those margins aren't there for VR. So VR remains in the hands of indie with the occasional first party IP that should blow our mind. And that's why I always talk about Asgard's Wrath. It's Meta taking an indie developer who knows VR well. Now they acquired Sanzaro and they say, you know what? We want a standout title. Here's the money. Do it. They gave them time and money and they banged out something awesome. Let's say what you will about Asgard's Wrath 2. It's one of my favorite VR games of all time. I still play it every single day. But enough digressing. The point is, there's no reason for these big AAA studios to stop and move into VR because they make more money on flat. So what we have to wait for is the indie studios to just get bigger and bigger and bigger over time, which has been happening because you had someone like Vertigo Games and then they get acquired by Koch Media. So obviously some people see the potential there and more money is coming into the industry. So like I said, light at the end of the tunnel, but we have a few more things to go over. Now, it's definitely a tough pill to swallow to say, listen, you just got to sit back and wait till these indie developers grow to the point of much larger studios, especially when we're in an industry where one bad game can completely tank your studio. So rather than just waiting for indie developers to get bigger and begging both Sony and Meta to give us a handout with their first party IPs, luckily for us, there are a few more reasons to be optimistic. Love it or hate it, the introduction of the Apple Vision Pro into the VR industry will have an overall positive influence. Just the fact that Apple made a product like this will get more people interested in VR, and those interested in gaming will either look towards the Quest 3, or if Apple wants to compete in that field, we can get some truly great games on their powerful mobile hardware. Now, both hybrid games or ported titles is a topic that comes up constantly. A lot of people think this is like the end-all be-all or the savior of VR. Now, I do want to dive into this a little bit. There's a place for hybrids. They can definitely bolster the overall library and bring some truly unique experiences over to VR. However, it's not just as simple as, hey, listen, you're saving all this money. You don't have to do the artwork or the storyline or anything. You just have to pay a team to port the game. But sometimes the money still might not be there. And to give you an example, the Resident Evil 4 remake, which released the VR mode a couple months later on PlayStation VR2, only 1.4% of the people who purchased that game tried it in VR. And with those numbers, it might not have even been worth the cost for extra development to get the game to work in VR. Those are numbers that people run, and it kind of sucks. But on that point, porting games is actually a pretty amazing aspect of VR. We have some great ports like Half-Life 2, the original Half-Life. Dr. Beast has done an amazing job. And I know of 2 studios that are opening up that are just focusing entirely on ports. So we should see a lot of other games or older titles. Even some of them, one of the recent one I heard is not old. It was like a 2-year-old game. It'll get ported to VR. They're kind of looking through all the games that are out there right now and saying, this would be good in VR. Let's port it. They work with the original developers and they add all the mechanics you would expect. So I know 2 studios that are doing that right now. So obviously that's going to be pretty solid for VR, just like UEVR is. It gave us a lot more ways to experiment with VR and see other experiences and even give developer new experiences. They might be curious, hey, what is my game like in VR? And we now gave them a really easy way to kind of glimpse it, and then maybe they'll proceed with that. So, like I said, there are a lot of reasons to be confident for the future. I think things are just going to get better and better, but we need to understand where VR is now and why titles like Half-Life Alyx or Asgard's Wrath are just the exception and not the norm. Why they are so rare, and it's going to take a bit longer till we get to more of those games, and why the majority of the games we're going to see are indie titles with one or more of those major aspects of a game missing. Like we're not going to get the big storylines. We're not going to get the cinematics. We're not going to get a lot of things that we love from flat screen gaming. VR gaming is different, and it'll be different forever. Even if it gets bigger than flat screen gaming at some point in time, which probably may never happen. However, even if it does, it's still never going to be an apples to apples comparison with flat screen. And that was today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, give me a thumbs up. I hope you guys learned a little bit here, why we are in the state we're in, how VR needs a lot more support, but we also kind of just need to bring attention to how things work so people have a better understanding. So again, if you enjoyed it, thumbs up. If you're new here, consider subscribing. And as always, I'll see you guys on next time.